Chrispin Phiri is the spokesperson for the Justice and Correctional Services Department. He joins us now. Chrispin, good afternoon to you. There's been a process around this to determine if the court or if all of the High Court should move from Makhanda. What's actually been decided at this point?
So what we're sitting with here firstly is an interim report around the rationalization of high courts in South Africa. And what we seek to look at is, do we have the right number of judges servicing a certain amount in a particular community? So the first thing that I also want to correct, and I also want to express some level of disappointment, is the fact that it seems to me that no one has actually read the report, but we now have opinions around this report. And on page 184 of the report, it's quite clear. It says that there's a recommendation by a rationalization committee to move the main seat of the court in the Eastern Cape, to move it to Bisho. And the rationale for that is simply that in capital cities, that's where you find the main seat of the High Court and not the local division. Whereas in the Eastern Cape, it's the other way around. The local seat is Bisho, as well as a circuit court being East London, as well as PE being or Gqeberha being a local division. But where the capital city is, you have a local seat. So the recommendation is just change that to become a main seat. That will have no impact on the court whatsoever. It will not physically remove the court from Makhanda. The court will still remain in Makhanda. It will still see litigation happening, and normal processes will apply. So Makhanda will still have a high court. Imagine, Stephen, completely uprooting a high court from a community. How would that be access to justice? What we're looking at here is having a process where we really ensure that we have access to justice. As we speak currently, the community of Makhanda is about 500,000 people. And when we look at the community of Bisho, for instance, they are well into the millions. So it makes sense for us to have more judges where there are more people, instead of us having 10 judges in Makhanda and 6 in Bisho. So that is the type of process we have embarked on, and that's what the rationalization process entails.
So in other words, what you're saying is it's all about, I mean, and I understand this, it's about the number of people being served by a particular number of judges and a particular number of courtrooms. You say that Bisho would be far better than Makhanda. I mean, there are other places in the Eastern Cape. I mean, you know, East London might be a bigger centre. Is it, I mean, I understand that the political capital is Bisho, but are you basing this on the political capital or only on the number of people who need a court?
Both. But the local division would remain in place. So the idea that there will be no litigation in Makhanda is a fallacy. The idea that there will be no court in Makhanda is a fallacy. But also we're not just looking at the population as an issue. What we're also looking at, Stephen, is access to justice in the literal sense. So if you live in Bisho and you're required to appeal a matter in the main court, you would have to go all the way, the main seat. You have to go all the way across to Makhanda. Or put it differently, if you live in Hammanskraal or Garankuwa, under the previous laws, that was called the Bophuthatswana, the main seat of the court there was Mahikeng. And we've still found instances in today's day and age where a litigant who lives in Hammanskraal has to go all the way to Mahikeng to litigate, whereas Pretoria is just 40 minutes away. So at the core of this, what we are solving for is access to justice at the most banal level, ensuring that access to justice is almost literally at your doorstep. You don't have to go very far to access the justice system, particularly at a high court level. We've done quite well in rationalizing the magisterial district. So at a magisterial level, at least now we would ensure that we have people accessing magistrate courts almost directly in the communities where they live, where possible. But with the high court, we are still seeing that most of the divisions are based on apartheid-era legislation or apartheid-era divisions, particularly in the Eastern Cape, where you have the Transkei, former Transkei, former Ciskei, and what was known as the Cape of Good Hope. That was originally where a place like Makhanda, formerly known as Grahamstown, fell under. So those are the historical anomalies that we are attending to. And it is quite sad that we have to be attending to these historical anomalies in 2023 only. But nonetheless, access to justice does mean that these issues must be resolved.
And in a way, I don't think people care where the seat of the court is. They care where they can get a judge and whether they can get a courtroom. If the seat of the High Court moves away from Makhanda, would any jobs be lost? In other words, would there be anyone employed at the High Court now who would lose their job?
None whatsoever. What would likely to happen is that we would see a slight decrease in the number of judges because we would have to move judges to maybe 2 judges as the recommendation recommends. So currently we have 10 judges in Makhanda servicing 500,000 people in the main, and other litigants who come from other areas of the Eastern Cape to then litigate in Makhanda. So we have 10 judges servicing 500,000 people. And in Bisho, we have something like 6 judges servicing over 1 million people. So we would probably have a scenario where we would have to move the judges that are currently placed in Makhanda maybe we would swap. So we would say we would have 8 judges in Makhanda and we would have 10 judges in Bisho. So assist the caseload that we are seeing in Bisho and also to match the caseload that we are seeing in Makhanda. So the decisions would be based on the level of litigation that's there. But you're not likely to see a loss of jobs. I think you're just likely to see more resources being allocated to where there are more people.
You're doing public consultation, and we know that emotions, and I take your point, you say that people haven't read the interim report, but it seems that people in Makhanda are very worried about this. Are there people in Bisho who are asking, I mean, I presume there's consultation there, are there people in Bisho who are asking for the change?
We've not come across, we've not come across specific changes or specific requests yet. This report has been presented to us by a committee which has consulted widely with the stakeholders directly involved in the application and delivery of justice. So we're talking about legal aid, the prosecuting authority, the judges, and litigants possibly in that area. So for instance, your Pabasas from the Eastern Cape have commented on this report. We're now soliciting comments directly from members of the public. And so that's the stage that we are at. But just to go back to say, I think it's important, the part of active citizenship is to ensure that which we are opining on, we've actually taken the time to actually read what the government intends to do instead of imputing something that government is completely not interested in doing.
You talk about the rationalization process. I would presume that we're likely to see as a result of this perhaps more courtrooms in Gauteng, both Joburg and Tshwane, and in other places. The simple fact is the population of the country is growing. The number of disputes and cases that judges need to deal with will be growing as well. And yet for quite a long time we've seen a very similar number of courts in some places.
That's precisely what we are solving for. So, for instance, what we've seen in Gauteng in particular is once we had the High Court division of Limpopo, most of the High Court judges that were actually located in Gauteng had to be allocated to Limpopo, and the same from Mpumalanga. But now the question remains is, do we actually have the right amount of judges given the rate of litigation that we're seeing in Gauteng, but also given the populace of Gauteng? The same would apply to KwaZulu-Natal. By the way, the Eastern Cape is probably our 3rd biggest province with about 12% of our population. So also there, we need to ensure that we actually have the right number of judges spread across the entire province to service our people.
Chrispin Phiri, thank you. Spokesperson for the Justice Department. Really do appreciate the time.